It's extraordinary the stories they will tell and they won't tell, because Ben Crump, who magically shows up in all these cases, which is a good transition to our Daunte Wright case.
Yep.
Ben Crump was out there telling people this weekend that he was shot for driving while black. That's completely false. I mean, you could have lots of problems with what the police did. He wasn't pulled over because he was black. It was a black police officer who was involved in the lead on the case. He was pulled over because he had a vote, because problems with his registration was out of, just word to the wise. Other than always in cash and never in writing, if you're on the lam and you have an outstanding warrant for a crime and you decided to skip court, don't drive in a car with license plates that are past their registration date. Just advisable. So that's why he got pulled over. And the only reason why they tried to arrest him was because of the outstanding warrant that they flagged. And what's interesting is this. Contrast it to the Floyd case. They could have used a lot more physical force on him. Instead, the cops being like, real careful, move your arm here, letting him be right by the door, trying to use no physical force at all.
Let the memes in the chat begin, Robert. Yes. Oh, by the way, we hit 10,000 again. So comments and thumbs up so that we can get those numbers up. Not that it matters. Hitting 10,000 on a live stream is a very beautiful feeling. Actually, it's a lot of people getting a lot of information that they're not getting elsewhere. And I'll just go over Daunte Wright, because some people might not know, and I don't want to make the what was the mistake the Barstool Sports mistake again. Daunte Wright, it's the biggest. It's been the most, the biggest incident in the States now. Driver pulled over for expired plates or expired tags. He had an outstanding warrant for, I believe it was armed robbery, and had failed to, and had breached his parole. He was out on $100,000 bail, I think.
Bail. Yeah, he didn't even show up for a Zoom hearing. It was a Zoom hearing. He didn't even show up for that.
And he had stopped contacting his parole officer. So serious stuff.
Well, it's probably the pretrial services. Well, it may be called parole, but it's basically his bail officer.
Okay. And
he hadn't been convicted of anything yet.
Okay, good point. My apologies. And what I was going to say, I presume the cops know this very quickly once they pull him over, like once they run the plates, or how quickly do they know?
Or I think it may have been his driver's license.
Okay.
So they pull him over. They discover the outstanding warrant. They're going to take him in. They're being real gentle. Only one cop is using any force on him. And so what happens when there's one handcuff put on one wrist? He breaks free, jumps in the car, tries to drive off.
And her name was Potter, Kimberly Potter.
Yes. So she sees that and says, "Taser, taser, taser," fires the weapon. As he drives off, the car crashes. Yeah. She turns to him and says, "Oh my God, I shot him." So it appears that she didn't know that she had pulled her gun instead of her taser.
So those are the facts. And she was swiftly charged, I believe, with
second-degree manslaughter, the lowest charge against Chauvin.
Okay, now, so I said in my analysis, I said, look, I don't think many people can disagree with the charge being brought. Now, I know people take offense to that or take exception to that.
I would. Actually, Dershowitz does. Dershowitz finds it an absurd charge.
Okay, but now, so this is the deal. I read through the statute for second-degree manslaughter. You have someone admitting in real time, oops, I made a mistake. I pulled out the wrong weapon and killed a man effectively. So, I mean, how is that on its face? It's a contemporaneous admission of having made a mistake that led to the death of an individual. Now, the question is going to be, was it an egregious enough mistake? Was it negligence in the sense of second-degree manslaughter or not? This is where I guess maybe I don't understand things. In order to bring charges, you have to have probable cause, which is more. Is it a higher threshold than what you would otherwise expect to be the beyond a reasonable doubt on conviction? As in, do you have to be certain of the underlying act in order to bring the charge for probable cause, or do you just have to have enough of a basis to think that the infraction was committed?
You just have to have probable cause, which itself is a low standard, but you have to believe as part of that probable cause that you can prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury. So it's a combined analysis. So while probable cause is a low standard, what it's evaluating is a high standard.
Okay, now that clarifies the fuzziness in my head. So probable cause is, are the elements there? Do they prima facie appear to be there? But do you feel confident you can prove them beyond a reasonable doubt on the merits? Now, Jonathan Turley had written an article where he had gone over, briefly referenced a few other cases where under similar circumstances, people were in fact convicted. So, I mean, on its face, you have her admitting at the time, I made a mistake. I just killed a guy. I mean, how does not on its face justify probable cause to the point to at least bring charges? And if there's a valid defense, which we're going to get to in a second, she'll make it on the merits. So it justifies the charges, but not a conviction. She'll have her trial.
The reason why Dershowitz has doubts about it is the same reason the New York Times detailed, which is in the 20 plus cases of this being documented to have happened in the last 20 years, they have only chosen to prosecute, I believe, 3 times. Now they've convicted in 2 of the 3, but basically they rarely indict. And usually they only indict when they don't believe that they had when they don't believe the cop story. So here's what it boils down to. Do you believe you can convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt? There's typically that she deliberately fired her gun. If, on the other hand, you think that she really was trying to fire her taser, then the level of culpable negligence criminally in Minnesota, like most places in the states, requires that you believe beyond a reasonable doubt and can convince a jury thereof that she believed at the time she pulled her weapon that she knew there was a substantial and unjustifiable risk of death. So it's not like straight negligence. We don't really have any negligent murder crimes in America. We require a higher mens rea. So that's the problem. If she really thought she was pulling her taser and firing her taser, then did she think that there was a substantial and unjustifiable risk of death when she pulled the trigger? So in my view, you would only go forward with the case if you think that she's lying about that she just planned on shooting him. I think it was a case of bad negligence, but not a case of criminal culpable negligence, because I don't think she had the mens rea that she thought what she was doing would likely kill him.
I mean, or the argument is just that it was so sloppy and she was so bad. I mean, some people said, okay, she shouldn't be charged, but she should be disciplined and fired.
Yeah. I mean, that's Norway.
Yeah, but the question is, if it's just such an egregious mistake, pulling a gun thinking it's a taser.
Now, what's interesting here is the politicians deserve a lot more blame than they're getting. So for many years now, taser companies, it's Allison Morrow's husband, Lynn, was talking about this. And we interviewed Allison last sidebar.
Yep. And Allison actually, I mean, just for the context there, Allison did a News with Booze with Eric, where she had her husband come on afterwards and another guy, forget his name now, where they discussed this very thing. It's worth watching on Eric Hunley's channel.
Absolutely. Great breakdown of that case, breakdown of the multiple other cases, the Virginia case, other cases that have been taking place recently. I mean, because Lynn teaches people on use of force and training. And there's, but the problem is, I was curious first, and then I saw that the local police department there decided to get tasers that look just like guns and feel just like guns. In other words, they're black, they're shaped the same, that the feel is the same. It's like, who came up with that idea? Now, maybe they have some explanation that I don't know about, but instinctively, because I thought the taser is supposed to be a totally different color, totally different shape, so it logically helps reduce the risk of that mistake occurring.
And it looked so realistic that when I saw the video, I didn't appreciate that I was looking at the video of the police officer who shot. I thought I was looking at the video of the other police officer, and it was the other cop from across who shot, because what I saw on the person's hands, I was convinced it was a gun, not a taser. That's a ridiculous thing in my mind. I don't know. I mean, I've never been a cop, never actually held a taser. But to me, they should look more like, flashy yellow things that are held more like an actual taser.
They're
and
totally weird shaped that will trigger a muscle memory different. But again, you could make an argument that this all happened because this is what happens when the police react to things like the Derek Chauvin trial. They're like, okay, we better not use any physical pressure. We better just go to the taser. That's much safer. And as the other expert talked about on Eric Hunley's Unstructured podcast, you can also get at Locals, unstructured.locals.com, was that there's an inherent risk with tasers, that maybe they're a lot more risky than people think. And it was an intriguing debate because Lynn made a good argument that if you can train people to handle military service very well, you can train police officers. The other person, who was a former police officer, said from his experience, we're expecting way too much, that these kind of mistakes will happen in a crisis moment. And that's a good question. I have doubts that she's guilty of criminal behavior. I think civil recklessness, write a check, be fired, all of that, some reform and train. The big reform is don't buy tasers that look and feel like guns. Start there.
That seems like a no-brainer. And it's even, I don't even understand why it would be that way in the first place if there's a functional aspect or whatever. Now let's contrast this, because some people disagreed with your take, about comparing it to Ashley Babbitt, where you have that situation. People don't agree on the facts on that situation, which is where I think a lot of the disagreement comes from, is people don't have a consistent understanding factually of what they're all prepared to agree actually happened. But you had the riots in Capitol Hill. You had a bunch of protesters banging down, breaking windows to try to get into a room where there were politicians, and there was security behind the door, apparently issuing warnings not to come in. Whether or not Ashley heard them is obviously up for debate, but Ashley's climbing over a table to get through a broken window, and there's a cop who fires point blank live round into a crowd with police officers behind Ashley, and with a crowd of people, had issued warnings and whatever, and was protecting politicians, whatever, and one round kills Ashley. And then the question is here, they investigated and they brought no charges. So the question
won't even disclose who it is that did it.
That's what people were. I don't want to mention the name if people seem to think there's a name, but I thought they had identified the police officer, but then the meme or the
not officially. People have tried to guess at it in the private media space, but there's been no official acknowledgement whatsoever.
Okay, hold on one second. I've been told that I have a light behind me. Hold on one second. There was a light flashing. Okay, let me get back into focus here.
I mean, it was summary execution for trespass. Compare it to the Minneapolis case. I mean, to my knowledge, his excuse wasn't that he thought that was a taser. So we didn't hear that from the Justice Department. And I mean, people were saying it was okay because it was justified. I was like, hold on a second. We don't have summary execution in America. The police officer doesn't get to at least of all for trespass and damaging property.
Well, the argument is going to, for anyone the argument would be this armed police officer has guns drawn, is defending politicians. They're trying to break into the room with politicians. In comes someone not defying whatever orders may or may not have been given. I thought there were orders. People are going to disagree on that element of fact. See someone come in with a backpack on, doesn't know what they're up to. I mean, whether or not the reasonable escalation is what it went to, highly arguable. But I say that,
like, how did that contrast to say someone's out on armed robbery, has skipped a bail, is in a car, is about to take off with someone else, and may have a gun. I mean, if you can't shoot that person, then why can you shoot Babbitt? That's the part that I was like, there's just complete inconsistency here, contradictory principles here. We got to have one standard for use of force, not multiple.
Or people are going to say when it comes to politicians, it's a different standard. It's that's what
it appears to be. It appears to be a politically motivated decision that has a completely different standard based on whether you're a line cop or versus in a Capitol Hill police context. And so, I mean, the other problem was they didn't release a lot of evidence because, as you note, there's contradictions out there in the evidence as to whether she heard anything. No, there are other people that have tapes that say, no, you can't hear anything. You can't hear a single warning on the tape. And it is a little freaky. You see the gun just sneak out, bam, pull back. You don't, I mean, I expected to see people step forward and say, everybody back, here's the gun, boom, boom. That never happened. They just snuck in and bam. And maybe they gave some sort of warning. But again, there's evidence that such a warning wasn't in fact heard, at least by other people that were near her. And there was a complete lack of transparency by the Justice Department. They didn't go through, compare it to the Michael Brown case, where the Justice Department issued like 100-page ruling as to why they weren't going to get involved because the evidence was overwhelmingly against prosecution in that case. Compare that to this, where there's almost no evidence given. And Technofog, who does a really good analysis on Substack and other places, he said that the Department of Justice analysis was completely bogus and contradicted prior prosecutions that they had brought. So my view is, at a minimum, I'm not a big fan of prosecuting everybody for every conceivable reason, but we deserved a much more thorough and transparent set of information. than what we got. Maybe there's an explanation from that officer that is persuasive, consistent with the evidence that shows why he believed it was necessary to use the force he did. But the message that comes out is, if you're on the wrong side of the political line, we can shoot you down and there ain't nothing you can do about it. Whereas if you're on the wrong side of the political line and we don't like what you did, then we can railroad you and legally lynch you. So it's a dangerous sign that our justice system is sending to people.